I'd like to start with land recognition. I recognize, honor, and give thanks to the Native caretakers and residents of my region, which is upstate Minnesota, their ancestors and future generations. This land was called home by the Ojibwe people, before them the Dakota and Northern Cheyenne people, and other Native peoples from time immemorial. We all have our own unique stories around spiritual health, and it's rarely a straight line. Like many people, I inherited a spiritual tradition. But at age 12, my father gave me a copy of a book, The Religions of Man by Houston Smith. And that book introduced me to the possibility that wisdom could be found in many different traditions. It became a lifelong exploration of spirituality and what it means to live well. What I didn't know then was that Houston Smith would later become one of the most influential scholars exploring the relationship between consciousness, spirituality, and entheogens. And decades later, I find myself asking that same question that Smith did. How do experiences that alter consciousness influence spiritual growth and understanding? Hi, my name is Meg, and today I'll be talking with you about spirituality as a dimension of health, the cannabis catalyst, shifting the balance, shared ancestry, cautions and benefits, and implications for nursing and holistic care. So medicine used to include the soul. Then biomedical models stripped it out to focus purely on the machine of the body. And only in the last 50 years have we realized that spiritual health is a vital, immeasurable dimension of overall well-being. And nurses were really at the forefront of this. There are two terms that I'd like to make sure that we're on the same wavelength about. The first one is consciousness, which is our capacity for awareness. So if I'm in a coma, I've lost consciousness, I'm not aware. If I'm wide awake with you here, I have consciousness and I am aware. And sleep, something like sleep, is somewhere in between where we fluctuate our level of awareness. That's necessary for spirituality, for us to experience that. And spirituality we define as the way we seek and express meaning and purpose in our lives, and the way we experience connectedness to the moment, to ourselves, to other people, to nature, and to the significance and sacred things in our lives. So spirituality is fundamentally about how we experience meaning and connectedness. What's the difference between knowing about spirituality and actually experiencing it? Well, to understand this, I'd like to share with you a famous thought experience from 1982 by a philosopher named Frank Jackson, and it's called Mary's Room. So imagine a brilliant scientist named Mary. She's a world-renowned scientist. She specializes in vision and perception of color, and she knows all there is to know about the science of how we see color. But there's a catch, right? Mary has spent her entire life confined to a black and white room. She's never seen actual color. She has only ever viewed the world through a black and white monitor. One day, Mary is finally released from her room, and she steps outside, looks down, and sees a vibrant red rose. So Jackson poses the crucial question, does Mary learn anything new? And the answer is yes. She didn't learn a new fact, but she learned what philosophers called qualia, which is the subjective lived experience of what it feels to see red. And this is a comparison I'll focus on today. Our everyday thinking is often like Mary inside the room, and a spiritual experience is Mary stepping outside. Now, let's take a look at how the brain actually steps outside the room. So as most of you know, within our consciousness, we have our executive network, our default network, and our salience network. So at the executive functioning level, we are looking at data and facts and logic and cause and effect, and that's Mary inside her room. The default network is our sense of a separate self, or our ego. And so that's like Mary's internal narrative as she's going through her daily life. And then the salience network, which is this kind of biological gear shift that opens us up to raw qualia of awe and unity, which is Mary stepping outside. So I've had my own experiences of this, as I'm sure you have as well. I took this picture a few years ago at the AHNA, American Holistic Nurses Association conference. I saw this rainbow during a break in a torrential downpour. My salience network switched into pay attention to that now. I was just overwhelmed by this sense of beauty and awe. So I pulled over and got out of my car using my executive network. I experienced this flood of connection to nature. And that's again bouncing back to my salience. Took a picture with it, which required some executive functioning. I did wonder for a second what people thought about this crazy woman on the side of the road staring at the sky, my default network. But I didn't care, again, default. And then I just stood there. I took in the body and the connection, the beauty and the connection with nature. Again, going back to salience. I texted the photo to a few friends, again, executive with a little bit of salience in there because it was all about not only my feeling of unity with nature, but also with friends and connections to them. And then I got in my car and drove home, back to my executive network. So that's how this process tends to work. So let's talk about how cannabis can be a catalyst for shifting the balance here. So cannabis turns down the volume in our brains. It quiets the executive functioning and softens the boundaries of our default mode, so we're less self-conscious as well. It puts the spotlight on our salience network, which it kind of turns in a lot of ways something that might be mundane into something awesome and deeply important, sacred and spiritual. And then the evidence for that is that brain imaging actually shows that altered connectivity across this triple network modulates how we process salience. There's not very much research behind this, but the research is pretty good. We have Johnstead, who found in 2020 that spiritual cannabis users tended to regard cannabis as an entheogen. And I'll remind us all that entheogen means generating the divine within, which I think is very apropos. And spiritual cannabis users had a different mode of engagement with cannabis than recreational users. Early Wine 2021 showed that higher doses of cannabis can produce experiences similar to those reported in psychedelic research, including increased insight, connectedness, and personal meaning, all characteristics of spirituality. And lastly, Hyde in 2022, in his study, and there were well over 1,000 people in this study, 66% of the participants reported spiritual benefit from cannabis versus only 5.5% who saw it as a hindrance. And his study really points to a similar importance in psychedelic research, that set and setting are really important. If people are using cannabis and their mindset is around, I'm using it for a spiritual purpose, they're more likely to have a spiritual outcome. And then again, setting, if you're in a place that's conducive to having that spiritual experience, that will again help you as well. So cannabis as a contemplative technology. Cannabis belongs to the same category as prayer, meditation, chanting, fasting, dance, and other spiritual practices. Some people totally don't agree with that, but for our purposes, it's just another tool to help us get into that space where we can have a spiritual experience. In fact, this little star down here, chicken or egg argument. Huston Smith, in his latest book, really points out that we're not really quite sure if religious experience and spirituality is a phenomenon outside of ourselves or inside of ourselves, or something that was brought about by entheogenic experiences. So cannabis has been utilized as a mild entheogen across cultures for millennia. While specific beliefs differ, as you'll see here, the common thread is that it fosters connection, insight, transcendence, and mystical experiences. So the evidence from China and Tibet in 4000 BCE is not entirely established, but they think that Taoist visionary traditions used it. Then in India, it's very well documented. Middle East and Central Asia and Africa also very well established. And then in more modern times, Islamic Sufism has used it. The ever popular Rastafari use of it as a sacrament. And then in the 1960s, with the counterculture and consciousness movements, it became a little bit more mainstream in terms of a spiritual tool. So I want to spend a minute talking about cautions and benefits. I'll start with the cautions. So current evidence does not support cannabis producing a lasting spiritual growth. For the most part, it's an acute experience, but when it's well integrated, it can provide the groundwork for lasting growth. It does not increase spiritual maturity. It does not improve meaning in lifelong terms or enhance wisdom. It does not improve religious commitment. A lot of religions, it's not one of their beliefs. And then it doesn't produce enduring increases in well-being through spiritual mechanisms. Those haven't been established yet. And I think it's also important that we consider the potential misuse of cannabis when we're thinking about cautions. And next, I'd like to just point out this idea of spiritual bypassing. So spiritual bypassing is a relatively new phenomena, and it's a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues or psychological wounds. And I think this is really important because it is used, admittedly, as a way to numb out and to avoid things that we really need to do, work that we really need to do. But at the same point, I think it's really important to point out that our culture really glorifies suffering in a lot of ways. But sometimes it makes a whole lot more sense to trek around the mountain than it is to climb over it. So I think that's something that you have to consider. We have to consider ourselves, but we also have to consider when working with clients and patients. In terms of benefits, cannabis commonly produces alterations in sensory perceptions, time perception, and emotional experiences, all characteristics of spiritual experiences. And it can help us in terms of interpreting spiritually meaningful events like mystical type experiences, that feeling of connectedness and unity, awe, and transcending ourselves. So implications for nursing. Our own ANA Code of Ethics states the nurse practices with compassion and respect for the inherent dignity, worth, and unique attributes of every person. Optimal nursing care enables the patient to live with as much physical, emotional, social, and religious or spiritual being as possible and reflects the patient's own values. Continuing on with this, I think it's important for us to recognize consciousness and spirituality as legitimate dimensions of care. I've heard so many people say that spirituality has no place in medicine. We're all about the mechanics of the body. And we know it's evidence-based now that that's just simply not accurate. It's important for us to address meaning, purpose, and connection with our clients and patients so that we know where their minds are at, where their spirits are at, and so that we can assist them with their healing in those areas. Assessment is key. There are some assessments out there for spiritual health that can be very helpful tools. Facilitating integration of spiritual experiences, I think, is really important. This is what makes those spiritual experiences stick, right? If someone has this experience during use of cannabis that feels transcendent, it's important for them to sit down with somebody else, or you can do some of it on your own, but it's helpful to sit down with someone else and process that. And that kind of solidifies that into our memory and helps us use it going forward in our lives as a valuable tool. It's important for us to practice cultural humility and decenter our own beliefs and experiences. This is all about the patients and how they see the world and what their sense of meaning and purpose are and their practices of spirituality. It's not about us and what we believe. It's important to create safe, non-judgmental conversations. You've heard a lot today about stigma. It's important to address that head on and do our own work in terms of being able to be supportive of others. It's also important for us to be able to differentiate spiritual experiences from pathology, because often when people are having a negative spiritual experience, sometimes it can look like symptoms of mental illness. So it's really important for us to be able to distinguish between the two. And then it's super important for us to be evidence-based in our practice, including harm reduction when that's appropriate. So lastly, I'd like to just introduce you, if you don't already know about this study, on connectedness and how it matters. And Christakis and Fowler did this work starting in 2008. In this particular one, they took the Framingham Heart Study data from 1996 to 2000, so it's over 1,000 people, which gives it a lot of statistical power. But Framingham is one community where they studied heart disease, but they collected a lot of data that was useful in other ways and used in this study. And they concluded that relationships form networks. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But they were looking at happy and unhappy people, and both of them cluster together. So if you look at that weird looking map, the blue are the unhappy people, and the bright green, the green kind of chartreuse color, are the happiest people. The other green is in the middle. But as you can see, the happy and in between people really cluster together, and they're closer to the center of the community and of the networks. And then the blue people, the people who are unhappy or sad, tend to be more isolated and tend to be outside the center, kind of towards the edges of a network. And so it's really important for us to remember that birds of a feather flock together, basically, right? So if connection, in my mind, if connection is central to happiness and a myriad of other topics, they did this for smoking cessation, divorce, gratitude, a variety of different topics. I guess my thesis is that perhaps it's also central to spirituality, that if we are interested in doing this work, that it's important for us to find community and network to be able to sustain ourselves and to sustain our clients and patients. I think it also applies to us as a professional community. This wonderful community that Heather has created, where we can come together and talk about topics that are really important to us and learn from each other, I think is just a great gift, and something that I hope that we'll be able to continue. So we spend much of our time helping people live longer. Perhaps spiritual health reminds us that our work is also about helping people live more deeply. Thank you.
I spent my whole life looking for the answer, reading every page, searching every name. And one quiet moment opened up the sky, and I finally saw what words could never say. Like stepping outside into living color. The world was always waiting for me to awaken. Open my heart, open my eyes, help me remember every tree, every star above whispers we're connected through wonder, through love. Through love. The river keeps flowing, the mountains still sing. Every leaf remembers the dance of everything. With reverence and intention, I slow my hurried mind and discover the quiet places where spirit likes to shine. Not to escape, but to return. Not to forget, but to remember that healing begins when the soul feels seen and the